My grandmother turned 87 the week before. My mother called to tell me my grandfather had passed. I hadn't been back to the house in almost 2 years. Not since Christmas, when my sister made a comment at the dinner table about how I still hadn't figured out my life yet, and everyone laughed, including my mother, and I smiled like it didn't carve something out of me. I drove home that night instead of staying over, told myself I had an early shift, and didn't mention it to anyone. That was the last time I slept under that roof. But grief has a way of making you set things down for a while. So I packed a bag, called my supervisor, and drove the 4 hours back to Millhaven. My grandfather had been the quiet kind of man, the kind who fixed things without being asked, who remembered how you took your coffee, who slipped $20 into birthday cards and wrote, "Don't tell your grandmother" in the memo. He and my grandmother had been married 61 years. She used to say he was the only person who never made her feel like she was too much. I understood exactly what she meant by that. When I pulled into the driveway, my mother was already on the porch. She looked tired, which made sense. She hugged me, asked about the drive, said my grandmother was resting. My brother was inside on his phone. My sister hadn't arrived yet, which also made sense. She lived 40 minutes away and had a habit of being late to things that weren't about her. The house felt smaller than I remembered. It always does when someone is missing from it. My grandmother came downstairs around 6. She looked the way very old people look, when they've been crying for days not broken. Exactly, but emptied out. She held my face in both hands and said, "There you are." Like I was something she'd been waiting to find. We had dinner. My brother ordered pizza because no one felt like cooking. And we sat around the table and talked about my grandfather, the way you do in the first days, the funny stories, the small habits, the way he always burned the toast but ate it anyway without complaint. My grandmother laughed twice. Both times it looked like it surprised her. Afterward, my mother said she and my brother were going to start sorting through some of my grandfather's paperwork the next morning. Estate stuff. She said it in a tone that was meant to sound practical, matter of fact, nothing to pay attention to. I offered to help. She said they had it handled. I didn't think anything of it then. The next morning I woke up early. The way I always do in that house, something about the way the light comes through the east windows. I made coffee, sat with my grandmother at the kitchen table, and let her talk. She told me about the last few weeks before my grandfather passed. The hospital visits, the last conversation they had, which was about a bird feeder he wanted to put up in the backyard in the spring. She said she kept looking at the backyard now and thinking she should still buy the bird feeder. Put it up anyway. I told her I would help her do that. She patted my hand. My mother and my brother were down in the basement most of the morning. I could hear them occasionally, the sound of boxes being moved, low voices. When I asked my grandmother if she needed anything from down there, her sewing kit, a spare blanket, anything, she looked toward the basement door and said she thought the spare blankets were in the hall closet upstairs. I didn't ask anything else. But around noon, when my grandmother went to lie down and my brother had stepped outside to take a call, I went to get a glass of water and my mother came up from the basement and nearly walked into me in the kitchen. She was carrying a cardboard box. She set it down on the counter quickly, almost like a reflex, and then looked at me in a way that lasted about 1 second too long. "Just organizing," she said. "Need any help?" "No." She picked the box back up. "It's a lot of old paperwork. Boring stuff. You don't have to worry about it." She took the box back downstairs. I heard the basement door click behind her. I stood there for a minute, looking at the door. There was nothing dramatic about that moment. No instinct screaming at me. No movie moment of sudden suspicion. I just noticed that she had used the word worry, which was a strange word for sorting through paperwork. You don't worry about boring stuff. You only tell someone not to worry if there's something to worry about. My sister arrived that afternoon. She pulled into the driveway in a car I didn't recognize, new or newer, one of those mid-size SUVs in a color called something like lunar silver. She hugged my mother for a long time at the door. She nodded at me over my mother's shoulder. We had never been close, my sister and I. She was 3 years older, and she had always inhabited the version of our family that I was only visiting. She was the one my parents talked about at dinner parties. The one they called first with news. Good or bad. I used to think maybe it was just personality that she was naturally more like them, that the distance between us was just difference. It took me a long time to understand that the distance was something that had been built, deliberately, over years. that I had been on the other side of a line I didn't even know existed. That night, after my grandmother went to bed, the four of us sat in the living room. My mother poured wine. My sister talked about the logistics, the service, the obituary, the reception afterward. She had opinions about all of it. My mother agreed with most of them. My brother scrolled his phone. I asked about the will. The room changed in a way I can only describe as an almost imperceptible tightening, like something had shifted in the air pressure. "We're handling it," my mother said. "Has anyone contacted the estate attorney yet? We have his information. We'll call Monday." My sister looked at her wine glass. My brother put his phone down. "Grandma might want to be involved in some of that," I said. "It's her estate, too." "She's grieving," my mother said. "She doesn't need to be burdened with details right now. I think she'd want to know what's happening with. We're handling it." Her voice had that particular edge I had heard my whole life, the one that meant the conversation was over. "You've been gone for 2 years. Let us manage this." I didn't say anything else. But I didn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, I woke up before anyone and went downstairs. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, and then I got up and walked to the basement door. I stood there for a long moment. Then I opened it and went down. The basement had always been my grandfather's space. He had a workbench along one wall, tools organized on a pegboard above it, labeled and neat. A shelf of old paint cans, a shelf of holiday decorations in clear bins, the water heater in the corner, a filing cabinet, old and gray, that I remembered from my whole childhood, where he kept insurance documents and tax returns and the kind of paperwork that accumulates over a life. The filing cabinet was open. Not just open, emptied out. The drawers were pulled out and left hanging, all of them, and the folders that had always been inside were gone. In their place, someone had stacked new folders, clean, labeled in my mother's handwriting, medical records, utilities, miscellaneous. On the workbench, there were 3 cardboard boxes. 2 of them were sealed with tape. One of them was open. I looked in the open box. There were documents inside, stacked, organized, some in folders. I picked up the folder on top. It was labeled Insurance Current. I opened it and found a homeowner's policy, updated 8 months ago, with my mother's name added as a co-policy holder. I put it back and picked up the next folder, bank statements. My grandfather's account and my grandmother's, and a joint account I didn't recognize. Going back 18 months, I saw a series of transfers, significant amounts, not catastrophic single movements, but consistent, steady, a few $1,000s each time. Moving into an account I didn't recognize. The transfers had started about a year ago and were still going when the statements ended. I stood at the workbench for a long time. Then I went upstairs, poured my coffee out in the sink, went to my room, and called my grandfather's estate attorney. I had found his name and number in my grandfather's address book, which was in a kitchen drawer where it had always been, which apparently no one had thought to remove. The attorney's name was on a card tucked in the back, the kind of card that comes with a nice pen that says for the important things. My grandfather had written "Good Man" beside the name in pencil. I got his voicemail. I left a message. I said I was the granddaughter of one of his clients, that I had some concerns about the estate, and that I would appreciate a call back as soon as possible. Then I sat on my bed and thought about what to do next. My grandmother was the one who changed everything, though she didn't know it at the time. She came down around 9, and I made her tea, and we sat in the kitchen, and she started talking about the house. She talked about how long they had lived there, 43 years, how they had bought it young and fixed it up slowly over the decades, how my grandfather had built the deck with his own hands the summer before my mother was born. She talked about the furniture she had chosen, the garden she had planted, the things she had accumulated over a lifetime that made the house hers. And then she said, "I've been thinking I might want to put the house in your mother's name. For simplicity, when the time comes. Your grandfather mentioned it." I kept my face very still. "Did he put that in writing?" I asked. She looked mildly puzzled. "I'm not sure. I imagine so. Your mother said he had taken care of all of it." "When did she say that?" "Oh, last week, I think. Or the week before. She said he'd updated everything, and she had the documents." I picked up my mug. I set it down. I said, "Carefully, Grandma, Would you be open to calling your attorney yourself, just to look over things together, before anything gets finalized?" She looked at me across the table. She was 87 and had been married 61 years and raised 3 children and survived things I would never fully know, and she had the kind of eyes that see more than they let on. She was quiet for a moment. "Is there something I should know?" she asked. "I think there might be," I said. "And I think you should hear it from someone who's known you your whole life before you hear it from anyone else." We talked for almost 2 hours. I showed her the bank statements I had photographed on my phone before I came upstairs. I showed her the homeowner's policy with my mother's name. I told her about the emptied filing cabinet, the boxes, the transfers. I told her I didn't know exactly what it all meant, but that I thought she deserved to look at it herself, with her own attorney, before anyone else told her what it meant. She didn't cry. I had expected her to cry. Instead, she got very quiet and very still, and she asked me to pour her a second cup of tea, which I did, and she sat with it for a while. "How long?" she finally said. Not angrily, just quietly. "The transfers started about a year ago," I said. "That's as far back as I could see." She was quiet again. "Your grandfather didn't tell me to put the house in her name," she said. "That was something she said," he said. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything to say. The attorney called me back that afternoon. I let my grandmother take the call. She went into the living room by herself and closed the door, and I sat in the kitchen and waited. My mother and sister came home from wherever they had been around 3. I heard them come in the front, heard my sister saying something about the caterer for the reception, heard my mother laugh softly at something. They came into the kitchen, and my mother stopped when she saw my face. "What?" she said. "Grandma's on the phone with the attorney," I said. The pause that followed was very specific. I had never seen my mother's face go from one expression to another quite that fast, from blankness to something that was not quite panic but was very close to it. "Why is she—" "She wanted to go over the estate documents," I said. "She asked me to help her get his number." My sister said my name in a low, warning voice, like I was a child doing something I'd been told not to do. "Stay out of things you don't understand," my mother said. "I understand the bank statements pretty well," I said. No one said anything for a moment. Then my mother said, "You went through private documents." "They were in an open box," I said. "In a house that belongs to Grandma. You need to mind your own business." "She is my business," I said. "She's my grandmother." My sister stepped forward. She had the particular energy she got in arguments not loud, but focused, like she was trying to take up as much space as possible. "You've been gone for 2 years," she said. "You show up now and act like you know what's been going on, what's been needed, who's been here. You have no idea." "I know what transfers out of a joint account look like," I said. "That money was—" "Don't." My mother's voice was sharp. My sister stopped. They looked at each other. The living room door opened. My grandmother came into the kitchen. She looked at all 3 of us standing there, and she said, "He's coming Monday, the attorney. He wants to review everything." My mother said, "Mom, I'd like you all to be here," my grandmother said. "All of you." She looked at me when she said it. "All." She went back upstairs. The next 2 days were very uncomfortable in the way that only family situations can be uncomfortable, where everything is still technically polite, where meals still happen, where someone still makes coffee in the morning, but where every word in every conversation carries a second conversation underneath it. My sister barely spoke to me. My mother was cordial in the deliberate way that means nothing. My brother, who I don't think fully understood what was happening, kept asking if everything was okay and getting non-answers from everyone. My grandmother was calm. That was the thing I hadn't expected. She was calm in the way that people get calm when they've made a decision and are waiting for the moment to act on it. She asked me to help her go through some things in her bedroom, not documents, just personal things. Photographs, letters. We spent most of Sunday afternoon doing that. She showed me a photograph of my grandfather from when they were young, before I was born, standing in front of a car he'd saved up 2 years to buy. She said he had been so proud of that car. She said the first time she rode in it, she told him it was the finest car she'd ever seen, even though it wasn't, because he looked so happy. I said that sounded like him. She said, "You're a lot like him, you know. He never could let something wrong just sit there either." Monday came. The attorney was a man in his late 60s with the manner of someone who had seen a great many family situations and had stopped being surprised by them. He sat at the dining room table with my grandmother and a folder of documents and went through everything methodically. My mother sat across from him. My sister sat beside her. My brother sat at the end of the table and said almost nothing. I sat next to my grandmother. What came out over the next 2 hours was not simple, but it was clear. My grandfather had updated his will 14 months ago. The original will, which the attorney had prepared and which had been filed correctly, left the house to my grandmother outright, divided certain financial accounts among their 3 children equally, and included a trust for my grandmother's care and living expenses to be managed by a third-party trustee. The house was not to be transferred to any family member during my grandmother's lifetime without her explicit written consent, witnessed and notarized. The version my mother had in her folder was different. Not dramatically different, not the kind of different that screams forgery. The kind of different that you would only catch if you were comparing documents carefully, side by side. A phrase here, a clause there. The house transferred immediately upon my grandfather's death. The trust removed. The accounts divided differently, not equally among 3 children, but with a significantly larger share going to my mother. My mother said the documents had been provided by a different attorney. One my grandfather had apparently consulted privately, without telling anyone, including his original attorney. The original attorney looked at her for a moment. He said he had spoken with my grandfather regularly in the last year of his life, and my grandfather had never mentioned retaining additional counsel. He said the signature on the alternate documents, while superficially similar to my grandfather's, had several characteristics he found worth examining further. He said he was recommending that my grandmother not sign or execute anything based on those documents until a proper review was completed. My mother said he was overstepping. My grandmother said, quietly, that he was doing exactly what she had asked him to do. The financial transfers required a separate process. The attorney recommended my grandmother consult with an elder law specialist and potentially contact the bank to flag the account activity. He used phrases like unauthorized transfers and fiduciary concern and potential remediation. He was careful with his language, the way attorneys are when they're being precise about serious things. My mother left the table at one point and came back. My sister didn't move. By the end of the meeting, my sister had gone somewhere behind her eyes, that particular closed-off expression people get when they're calculating something. My grandmother thanked the attorney and walked him to the door. When she came back, she stood in the dining room doorway and looked at my mother and my sister and said, "I need you both to go home today." My mother said her name. "I am asking you to go home," my grandmother said. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." There was a long silence. "After everything we've done for you," my mother said. My grandmother looked at her. "I know what you've done," she said. "That's the problem." They left. My brother left an hour later, apologetic, confused, giving me a hug that felt like he wanted to say something but didn't know what. I told him it would be okay. I didn't know if that was true. The next weeks were not simple. The estate process is never simple, and this one less so than most. There were conversations with attorneys and banks, and in one case, a fraud specialist the bank's legal department recommended. The alternate will was examined carefully, and the examination found what the attorney had suspected. There were official processes set in motion that I won't detail here because they are still, in certain respects, ongoing. What I can tell you is what happened to my grandmother. She did not leave the house. It remained hers, as it had always been, as my grandfather had always intended. The trust my grandfather had arranged was restored and properly administered. The money that had been moved was largely recovered through the bank's remediation process, though not entirely. My grandmother hired a different financial advisor, a woman she found through her church, who helped her understand what she had and what she was owed. She put up the bird feeder in March. She called me when she put it up. She said a chickadee came within 10 minutes. She said she thought my grandfather would have liked that. My mother did not speak to me for 4 months. My sister did not speak to me for longer. There were messages from extended family members I barely knew, telling me what I had done to this family, how I had betrayed my mother, how I had taken a grieving woman and poisoned her against her own daughter. One message called me a name I won't repeat here. I read all of them once, and then I didn't read them again. I had a conversation with my brother around the 3rd month. He had been processing things slowly, the way he does. He called me on a Tuesday evening and asked if I thought I had done the right thing. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. He has always been someone who needs to talk through things out loud. I told him I thought I had. I told him there were moments I asked myself whether I could have handled it differently, whether there was a version where it went another way. I told him I didn't think there was. The thing about a wrong that's already been done is that looking the other way doesn't undo it. It just makes you part of it. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he thought so too. He said he wished he'd said something sooner, that he'd had a feeling things weren't right but hadn't wanted to get involved. I told him that was human. He said it wasn't a good excuse. I said no, probably not. But it was understandable. We talked for 2 hours that night. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had. I drove back to Millhaven in April. My grandmother made soup and we sat on the deck my grandfather had built, and she told me she had started going to a grief support group at her church. She said it was mostly women her age who had lost husbands, and they talked and had coffee, and it was helping. She said one of the women had a daughter who played bridge and asked if my grandmother played. She said she hadn't since she was 40, but she was thinking about relearning. I asked her if she was okay. Really okay. She thought about it in the way she does when she wants to answer honestly, instead of automatically. She said, "I've lost things I can't get back. Your grandfather, the idea of your mother that I had for a long time." She looked at the bird feeder. "But I still have the house. I still have my mind. I still have some people I trust." She looked at me. "I'm okay." There is a thing that people say about situations like this one, that blood is thicker than water, that family is family, that you don't air the dirty laundry, that you let things go for the sake of keeping the peace. I grew up hearing those things. I internalized them for a long time. I thought that loyalty meant staying quiet when you saw something wrong, that love meant absorbing things without naming them. I don't believe that anymore. My grandmother is 87 years old. She has been a mother and a wife and a friend and a woman who outlasted and outloved and outworked more than I will ever know. She deserved to know what was happening in her own house, with her own money, with the estate her husband spent a lifetime building for her. She deserved someone to walk into that basement and open that box. I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I was the one who did it. She called me last month. She said she'd won 3 hands of bridge, and she thought she was getting the hang of it again. She laughed when she said it, the real laugh, not the surprised one from the first night. I told her my grandfather would have been pleased. She said, "He would have been. He always said you were the one worth watching." I sat with that for a while after we hung up. The idea that someone saw it, all along, even when it was hard to see anything at all. I think about that when things are hard. I think about the bird feeder and the bridge game, and the way she held my face in both hands at the door when I arrived, like I was something she'd been waiting to find. I think about 61 years of a marriage and a man who wrote "good man" next to someone's name in pencil, because that was the thing that mattered. I'm not sure what's going to happen with my mother. I'm not sure what forgiveness looks like for something like this, or whether it's mine to give, or whether it's even the right frame for it. Those are questions I'm still sitting with. I don't have a tidy answer, and I'm trying to be okay with that. What I know is this. I went into that basement. I opened the box. I sat across the kitchen table from my grandmother and told her what I found, and I let her decide what to do with it. And she is still here. 87 years old, learning bridge again, feeding a chickadee in the backyard her husband built for her. That's enough. For now, it's enough.